Welcome to the story. Welcome back. Today's story is about betrayal, deception, and a choice that changes everything. Will he fight for love or finally walk away? Watch until the end, the truth will shock you. Before we start, like the video, subscribe for more stories. Comment your thoughts, would you stay or leave? Turn on notifications. Now let's begin. The silent wound, a betrayal that changed everything. The setup, a marriage in slow decay. Ethan and Julia had been married for 32 years. They built a life together, raised 2 children, and weathered life's ups and downs. But somewhere along the way, their marriage lost its spark. The past decade had been quiet, routine, and, at times, completely emotionless. Their conversations became transactional. Their intimacy had faded into nothingness. Ethan knew Julia was unhappy, but they had never talked about it. And over time, he convinced himself that this was just how long-term marriages worked. Then, everything changed. The beginning of the affair. It started when Julia met Ryan, a 42-year-old caregiver at the facility where her aging father lived. At first, Ethan didn't think anything of it. Julia was a nurturer, always drawn to people who needed help. Ryan was charming, attentive, and, most importantly, broken. He confided in Julia about his struggles. His career instability, his unhappy marriage, his dreams that had fallen apart. Julia, feeling unseen in her own life, became his shoulder to lean on. One night, after months of conversations, lines were crossed. They had unprotected sex, a decision so reckless and impulsive that even Julia admitted later that she couldn't explain why she did it. What made it worse? Ryan told her afterward that he had hoped to get her pregnant. It was a ridiculous fantasy. Julia was long past menopause. But instead of feeling disgusted or terrified, she found herself drawn in deeper. She later claimed that at the time, she believed she deserved to feel wanted again. She even justified her actions by looking at other friends who had affairs. If they could do it, she thought, why couldn't I? The emotional affair and the lies that followed. After that first night, Julia promised herself it wouldn't happen again. But instead of ending, their relationship evolved. For the next 6 months, Julia and Ryan engaged in an intense emotional affair. They texted constantly, in the car, at home, even while on vacation with Ethan. She would step outside to take his calls, whispering late into the night while Ethan slept in the next room. Whenever Ethan questioned why she was so emotionally invested in Ryan's problems, she brushed him off. He's just a friend who's going through a tough time, she insisted. She even convinced Ethan to sympathize with Ryan's struggles. Ryan was losing his job. His wife was leaving him. He was battling alcoholism. Julia wasn't cheating, she was helping. And Ethan? He trusted her completely. The breaking point, D-Day. Then came September 5th. Julia had been gone for hours that day. When she returned home, Ethan was waiting. Where were you? He asked. With Ryan, she admitted. Ethan lost his temper. He had already told her she was spending too much time with him. She had ignored him. He demanded to know, why do you care so much about this guy? Julia hesitated. Because I feel emotionally connected to him, she said. Something snapped in Ethan's brain. Are you attracted to him? He asked. She looked away. Yes. The room spun. Ethan stormed out, furious. But then, as if hit by lightning, he had a thought. What if it wasn't just emotional? He ran back inside, face burning with rage. Did you have sex with him? Julia dropped her head into her hands. Silence. That was his answer. The world imploded. Ethan saw red. The rage that boiled inside him was unlike anything he had ever felt before. His wife of 32 years had been lying right to his face. Everything he believed about their marriage, about her, had just shattered. The aftermath, a man unraveling. Ethan lost control. He screamed at her, called her names he never thought would leave his mouth. Then he ran. He got in his car and drove aimlessly, nearly crashing multiple times. His mind raced with dark thoughts. Should he confront Ryan? Should he leave? Should he end it all? At some point, he realized he was no longer safe to drive. He went home. That night, he set up a tent in the backyard, but he didn't sleep. Not for another 5 days. The hunt for the truth. The next morning, the real investigation began. Ethan took her phone and downloaded everything. Every text, every call log, every location history. Then he found Ryan's home address. He messaged Ryan's wife, sister, and closest friends. He sent them proof of the affair. Ryan's wife responded immediately. "Thank you for telling me. This isn't the first time he's done this. I'm leaving him for good." Ethan felt a sliver of satisfaction. Ryan deserved this. But that didn't fix anything. The damage was done. The marriage Ethan thought he had was gone. Reconciliation or escape? For the next few weeks, Ethan was a wreck. He stopped eating. He stopped sleeping. He took time off work because he couldn't function. But then, something strange happened. He realized that he didn't want to leave Julia. Not yet. They started counseling. She cut off contact with Ryan. She admitted that the affair was not worth it. But the damage was done. Their sex life was dead. She said she felt no attraction to Ethan anymore. She blamed her own trauma, her past experiences, her limerence. A state of obsessive infatuation she had fallen into with Ryan. But Ethan made one thing very clear. "I will not stay in a sexless marriage. The future unwritten." Now, every day is unpredictable. Some days Ethan feels hopeful about rebuilding. Other days he's consumed by the betrayal. His mind is filled with mind movies. Visions of Julia and Ryan together. He wonders if he will ever look at his wife the same way again. He wonders if she truly regrets what she did, or if she just regrets getting caught. Most of all, he wonders if love is enough. Because in the end, some betrayals never heal. 58 days after D-Day, the illusion of progress. Ethan sat in his car outside their home, gripping the steering wheel so hard his knuckles turned white. Another long day of therapy. Another session of forced honesty. Julia was inside, waiting. She had been doing the work, or so she claimed. But Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that something was still off. Yes, she had ended things with Ryan. Yes, she had cut off all contact. Yes, she was going to therapy. But there was one problem. She still didn't want him. No intimacy. No touch. No spark. Just guilt. Ethan exhaled, stepped out of the car, and walked inside. The ghost of Ryan still lingers. Julia sat on the couch, a mug of tea in her hands. She looked up when Ethan walked in, her expression unreadable. "How was work?" she asked softly. Ethan didn't answer. He dropped his bag on the table and stared at her. She shifted under his gaze. "What?" Ethan clenched his jaw. "Do you still think about him?" Julia flinched. "Ethan, we've talked about this." "Then say it." Her fingers curled around her mug. "I don't think about him the way I used to," she said carefully. "That's not what I asked." A long silence stretched between them. Finally, she exhaled. "Sometimes," she admitted. "But not because I miss him. I don't know. It's just there." Ethan felt sick. Even after everything, Ryan was still in her head. She saw his expression and immediately backpedaled. "But it's fading, Ethan. I promise you, it's fading." Ethan turned away, running a hand over his face. "Not fast enough. The marriage that no longer exists. They still shared a bed. But that's all it was. Two people, lying next to each other in silence, each trapped in their own prison." Julia had told him she was working on rebuilding attraction in therapy. Ethan wasn't sure if he believed her. Or worse, maybe it wasn't something that could be rebuilt at all. Because love wasn't the problem. The problem was desire. And desire had been the first thing to die. Ethan's breaking point. One night, after another intimacy-free week, Ethan finally snapped. They had just finished dinner. Julia was washing dishes, and something inside him broke. He walked up behind her, placed a hand on her back, and leaned in. "Julia." She stiffened. Ethan closed his eyes. "Do you even want me anymore?" She turned off the faucet, gripping the edge of the sink. Then, she turned around and looked at him, and what Ethan saw in her eyes shattered him all over again. Hesitation, regret, pity, not desire, not love, Just a woman who was trying to want something she no longer felt. And for the first time since this nightmare began, Ethan wondered, is this even worth saving? Meanwhile, Ryan returns. Elsewhere in the city, Ryan sat at a bar, nursing his third whiskey. His life had collapsed. His wife had left him. He had lost his job. And Julia, his Julia, had disappeared. She had ghosted him, cut him off, acted like he never existed. And Ryan wasn't done. He pulled out his phone, scrolled through his contacts, and then he typed a message. Julia, I know you don't want to hear from me, but I need to see you. One last time, just to talk. Please. Ryan stared at the screen, his thumb hovering over send. Then he tapped it, and just like that, the past was about to come crashing back. Day 59, a message that should have stayed unsent. Julia sat in bed, scrolling mindlessly through her phone. Sleep had become impossible. Ethan was in the bathroom, the faint sound of running water muffling the tension that had settled between them like an invisible wall. Then her phone buzzed. Ryan, Julia, I know you don't want to hear from me, but I need to see you. One last time, just to talk. Please. Her heart stopped. Ryan. The name alone sent a wave of confusion and guilt through her. She stared at the message, her thumb hovering over the screen. Delete it, ignore it, or respond? She swallowed hard, looking toward the bathroom door. Ethan had been watching her like a hawk ever since the affair was exposed. If he saw this message, if he even suspected Ryan had reached out again, everything would be over. But still, her fingers twitched. And before she could stop herself, she typed a response. Ryan, you can't message me. This has to stop. She hit send. Her chest felt tight, as if she had just done something terribly, terribly wrong. Then another buzz. Ryan, I just need closure, Julia. Please. 5 minutes. Then you'll never hear from me again. She stared at the screen. 5 minutes. That's all he wanted. And in that moment, something inside her, something selfish, reckless, and unresolved, whispered, what's the harm? Day 60, Ethan's growing suspicion. Ethan knew something was off. Julia had been distant all morning. Her phone glued to her side in a way that made his gut churn. And then there was her nervous energy, the way she avoided his gaze, the way she flinched every time her phone vibrated. Something was wrong. At first, he tried to rationalize it. Maybe it's just the guilt. Maybe she's still working through her emotions. But his instincts, the same instincts that had been asleep for years, were screaming at him now. She was hiding something. And Ethan? Ethan was done being the blind, trusting fool. The meeting that shouldn't have happened. Downtown cafe, 3:15 p.m. Julia walked through the doors, her heart hammering. Ryan was already there, sitting in the back corner, nursing a black coffee like it was something stronger. She hesitated. She shouldn't be here. She should turn around. Leave. Go home to Ethan and tell him. Tell him what? That she still had unfinished business with the man who had shattered their marriage? No. Instead, she took a deep breath and sat down. Ryan looked up, a slow smirk playing on his lips. You actually came, he said. She folded her hands on the table. This is the last time, Ryan. His smirk faded. I know. A pause. Then, I just need to know. Did you ever actually love me? The question hit her like a freight train. Because the truth was more complicated than she had ever admitted. Ethan's discovery. Home, 3:25 p.m. Ethan's heart pounded as he scrolled through Julia's phone records. She had left it on the counter, a mistake. And what he found? One recently deleted text thread. His stomach dropped. His hands shook as he stared at the undeniable truth. Ryan had messaged her, and she had responded. She had hidden it. She had lied. Again. Ethan clenched his fists, a cold rage settling in his chest. Julia was still protecting him, still keeping secrets. And now there was only one question left. Where is she right now? And in that moment Ethan knew. He grabbed his keys. He was going to find her. And when he did, this time there would be no coming back. Day 60, the cafe meeting that should have never happened. Julia took a slow, shaky breath, staring at Ryan across the small cafe table. Did you ever actually love me? The question hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Her heart pounded as she searched for the right answer. One that wouldn't make this worse. One that wouldn't validate the disaster she had already created. But the truth? The truth was something she didn't even fully understand herself. I don't know, Ryan, she finally admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Ryan let out a humorless chuckle, shaking his head. That's not a no. Julia looked away, because no matter how much she wanted to erase the past, she couldn't lie to herself. Ethan's arrival, the betrayal caught in real time. Downtown cafe, 3:40 p.m. Ethan parked across the street, gripping the steering wheel so hard his knuckles turned white. There she was, sitting across from Ryan, talking, hiding, lying. A sick, gut-wrenching rage boiled inside him. After everything, after the pain, the sleepless nights, the therapy, the promises, she was still here, with him. Ethan felt his chest tighten, his breath coming in short, angry bursts. He couldn't believe it, but he could see it. And that was enough. His hands shook as he reached for the door handle. Then he stopped. Not yet. Not here. Not like this. He needed to know why. So instead, Ethan pulled out his phone. Click. A single picture. Proof. Then he sat back and waited. Waited to see if Julia would tell him the truth. Waited to see if she would destroy what little was left of their marriage with her next decision. Inside the cafe, the final lie. Ryan leaned forward, his eyes locked onto hers. Julia, tell me something, he said. If you could go back to before any of this started, would you still choose me? Julia froze. Every answer felt like a trap. She knew what she should say, but she also knew what he wanted to hear. So she hesitated. And that hesitation was all Ryan needed. He smiled. You don't have to say it, he murmured. I already know. Julia's stomach twisted. She had made a mistake. Coming here, letting him in, letting this drag on. She needed to leave. Now, she stood abruptly, grabbing her bag. This was a mistake, she said, voice tight. I shouldn't have come. Ryan's smile didn't fade. Maybe, but you did. Julia turned and walked away. Ryan didn't follow. He didn't have to, because the damage, it was already done. Ethan's confrontation, the last lie exposed. Home, 5:15 p.m. Julia stepped inside, still shaken. She hadn't even made it 5 feet before Ethan spoke. How was your afternoon? Julia's breath hitched. The way he said it, calm, even, but ice-cold underneath, made her blood run cold. She turned slowly. It was fine, she said, forcing a smile. I just ran some errands. Ethan's stomach turned. She had a chance. A single chance. And she just threw it away. He pulled out his phone, tapped the screen, and held it up. The photo. Julia sitting in the cafe. With Ryan. Her face drained of color. Ethan watched every ounce of confidence and control vanish in an instant. Try again, he said flatly. Julia opened her mouth, then closed it. There was no way out of this. She had been caught. She had lied. Again. Ethan clenched his jaw, his voice shaking with rage and heartbreak. You promised me, he whispered. You swore this was over. Julia swallowed hard. It wasn't. Don't. Ethan cut her off, his voice sharp. Don't insult me with another excuse. The silence between them was thick and suffocating. Then, finally, Julia's shoulders slumped. She closed her eyes and whispered the words that changed everything. I don't know if I can love you the way I used to. The floor fell out from under Ethan's world. His hands curled into fists, his vision blurred. And in that moment he knew they were no longer trying to save their marriage. They were trying to survive its collapse. Day 61, a house built on lies. Ethan sat in the dimly lit living room, staring at the photo on his phone. Julia, Ryan, together. Even though she had come home to him, even though she claimed she was trying, she still chose to see him. And worst of all, she lied. Again. The rage in his chest had burned out, replaced by something colder, heavier, emptier. For the first time, he wasn't just angry. He was done. But there was one thing left to do. He needed to hear her say it. Why? Julia's confession, the final blow. Julia sat at the kitchen table, a cup of untouched tea in front of her. She looked exhausted, defeated. Ethan sat across from her, his gaze sharp, unreadable. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then, why did you do it? Julia's hands trembled as she traced the rim of the cup. I don't know, she whispered. Ethan's jaw tightened. Bullshit. Julia exhaled shakily, her eyes glassy with unshed tears. I needed to see him, to close that chapter. Ethan let out a bitter laugh. That's funny, he said, because you didn't seem to have a problem closing it for me. Julia flinched. Ethan leaned forward, his voice low, sharp, and cold. Tell me the truth. If I hadn't caught you, would you have told me? Julia froze. The hesitation was longer than it should have been. And that was the answer. Ethan shook his head, standing up. I can't do this anymore. Julia's breath hitched. Ethan, please. He held up a hand. I don't want to hear it. I don't want more excuses. I don't want more lies. His voice broke slightly. I just want to know. Do you even love me anymore? Julia's face crumbled. I do, she said softly. But it's different now. Ethan let out a shaky breath. And that was it. That was the moment he knew their marriage would never be the same again. Ryan's next move, the unfinished game. Ryan's apartment, 11:30 p.m. Ryan sat on his couch, a half-empty bottle of whiskey on the table beside him. He stared at his phone. Julia hadn't responded to his last message. She had walked away from him at the cafe. But Ryan wasn't done. He pulled up her contact, typed out a message. You don't have to lie to yourself, Julia. You still care about me. You wouldn't have come if you didn't. Just say the word, and I'll be there. He hesitated. Then, with a smirk, he hit send. And this time, he knew she wouldn't be able to ignore it. Day 62, the final test. Julia sat on the bed, staring at her phone. The message from Ryan glowed on the screen. Ethan was in the shower. She could delete it now, pretend it never happened. Or, she could respond. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. This was it. The moment that would decide everything. If she answered, she knew what it would mean. If she didn't, then she was truly letting him go. She swallowed hard, and typed, Ryan, this has to stop. I can't talk to you anymore. She hesitated. Then she hit send. Her heart pounded. Would he accept it? Or was this just the beginning of something even worse? Behind her, the bathroom door opened. Ethan stepped out, his expression unreadable. He knew something was wrong. And Julia? Julia wasn't sure she could keep up with the lies anymore. Day 62, a marriage on the edge. Julia couldn't breathe. The message to Ryan was sent. Her fingers still tingled from the weight of her decision. But now she felt something worse than guilt. Fear. Because she knew Ryan. And Ryan didn't take rejection well. The air in the bedroom felt suffocating. Ethan was standing near the dresser, rubbing a towel through his damp hair. He looked at her. Really looked at her. Something wrong? He asked, his voice neutral. Too neutral. Julia shook her head quickly. No. Just tired. Ethan didn't move. Didn't blink. Didn't believe her. But he didn't push. Not yet. Instead, he walked over to the bed, climbed in beside her, and let out a slow sigh. Julia stared at the ceiling. She knew she should delete the conversation with Ryan. Erase it. End this. But instead, her thumb hovered over the screen. She didn't know why. Or maybe she did. Maybe a small part of her was waiting. Waiting to see if Ryan would let her go. Or if he would come back one last time. Ryan's response, the obsession that won't die. Ryan's apartment, 2:10 a.m. The text sat on Ryan's screen, glowing like a burning ember in the dark. Ryan, this has to stop. I can't talk to you anymore. He chuckled under his breath, shaking his head. Sure, Julia, he muttered. Whatever you say. He reached for his whiskey glass, took a slow sip, and leaned back against the couch. Julia thought she was done with him, but he knew better. She wouldn't have come to meet him if she was truly done. She wouldn't have looked at him the way she did. That hesitation? That wasn't closure. That was doubt. And Ryan was a patient man. He picked up his phone, smirking to himself as he typed. You don't mean that. You know where to find me when you change your mind. He sent it. Then he pulled up another screen and started searching, because if Julia really wanted to end things, she was going to have to prove it. And Ryan, he was going to make sure she couldn't. Day 63, the Cold War begins. Ethan woke up before Julia. The morning light filtered through the curtains, casting long shadows across the room. He glanced at her sleeping form, her breathing slow, steady, peaceful. But Ethan hadn't slept at all. Not really. His mind had been running in circles, picking apart every lie, every half-truth, every unanswered question. Something wasn't right. And it wasn't just what happened at the cafe. It was her. The way she moved. The way she spoke. The way she flinched whenever her phone buzzed. She was still hiding something. Ethan slowly got out of bed, careful not to wake her. He reached for her phone on the nightstand, paused. Then he took a deep breath and swiped the screen. The screen didn't unlock. A new passcode. Ethan's stomach dropped. She changed it. Again. For the third time in 2 months. He felt the room tilt. It was happening again. She was lying. Again. The rage that had been simmering under the surface for weeks began to rise. Ethan clenched his fists, staring at the device in his hand. Then, Julia stirred behind him. "Morning," she murmured, her voice groggy. Ethan turned slowly, holding up the phone. "You changed your passcode." Julia blinked, still half asleep. Then, realization hit her face like a slap. Her mouth opened, closed, opened again. "Ethan, why?" Her throat bobbed. It's nothing. Just security reasons." He laughed. A dry, hollow sound. "Security reasons?" he repeated. "Security from who, Julia?" She sat up fully now, pulling the blanket around her like it could protect her from the conversation. "You're making this into something it's not." Ethan took a slow step forward. "Then tell me what it is." Julia swallowed hard. "Nothing is going on." Ethan held her gaze for a long, painful moment. Then he tossed the phone onto the bed. "Okay," he said simply. Then he turned and walked out. Julia didn't stop him, because deep down, she knew he didn't believe her anymore. Ryan's next move. The game isn't over. Unknown location, 9:15 a.m. Ryan sat at a coffee shop, scrolling through his phone. Then he found it. Julia's husband. Ethan. Social media. Email. Work information. It was all right there. Ryan smirked. "Let's see how much you really know, Ethan." Then, he started typing. Day 64, the message that could destroy everything. Ethan's office, 10:32 a.m. Ethan's workday had been a blur of emails and meetings, but he couldn't focus. His mind was still back home, still stuck on Julia. Then his phone buzzed. A new email. No subject line. No sender name. Just one message. "You don't know the full story. If you want the truth, meet me. Alone." Ethan's blood ran cold. Then he saw the name at the bottom. Ryan. Ethan's hand tightened into a fist. His pulse pounded. And for the first time in months, he felt something stronger than heartbreak. Rage. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Day 64, the email that changed everything. Ethan stared at the screen. "You don't know the full story. If you want the truth, meet me. Alone." Sender. Unknown. But he didn't need to guess. It was Ryan. Julia's affair partner. The man who blew up his marriage. And now he wanted to talk. Ethan's blood burned. His first instinct? Delete the email. Ignore it. But something held him back. Because deep down he knew Ryan wasn't bluffing. If he was reaching out, it meant there was something Julia hadn't told him. And that was something Ethan couldn't ignore. His fingers hovered over the keyboard. Then he typed, "Where and when?" He hit send. And just like that, the game had changed. Julia's worst fear comes true. Home, 5:45 p.m. Julia could tell something was off the moment Ethan walked in. The way he carried himself. The way he didn't look at her. The way he seemed somewhere else. She swallowed hard. He knows something. But what? Then his voice cut through the silence. "I'm going out." Julia's stomach twisted. "Where?" she asked carefully. Ethan shrugged, grabbing his jacket. "Just out." Julia's hands clenched into fists. She knew that tone. That controlled, measured calm he used when he was already 3 steps ahead. She felt her throat tighten. Ethan. But he was already at the door. And before she could stop him, he was gone. And with him, the last chance she had to keep this secret buried. The meeting face to face with the enemy. Abandoned parking lot, 6:30 p.m. The sun was setting. Ethan stood beside his car, arms crossed, his heartbeat pounding in his ears. Then a car pulled up. Ryan. He stepped out, hands in his pockets, a smug smirk on his face. Ethan's jaw tightened. "You got balls emailing me," Ethan said. Ryan shrugged. "I figured you'd come." Ethan's fists curled. "Say what you have to say before I put you through that windshield." Ryan chuckled. "Relax. I'm not here to fight." His smirk faded. "I'm here to tell you the truth." Ethan's pulse spiked, but he kept his face blank. "What truth?" Ryan exhaled. "Julia didn't just lie to you about meeting me." Ethan's breath stilled. Ryan's next words? They changed everything. "She never stopped talking to me." The world tilted. Ethan's entire body locked. Ryan watched his reaction carefully. "You think she ended it after you caught her?" "She didn't." He pulled out his phone. A single text thread. Ethan recognized the number immediately. "Julia." The messages were right there. "I miss you. I hate that we can't talk. Ethan is watching me. I don't know what to do. Just wait. I need time." Ethan's stomach turned. His vision blurred. He wanted to deny it, tell himself it was fake. But the timestamps, the dates, this wasn't from months ago. This was from last week. And just like that, the last shred of hope died. Ethan felt sick. Everything she had told him, every apology, every promise, every tear, it was a lie. Julia had never truly ended it. She had just hidden it better. Ryan shoved his phone back into his pocket. "Now you know," he said simply. Ethan stood frozen. He felt like the ground beneath him had collapsed. Like he had been standing on quicksand for months and was only now realizing he had already sunk too deep to escape. Ryan watched him carefully. Then he gave a slow, mocking smile. "So, Ethan." His voice was smooth. "What are you gonna do now?" Day 64, the truth hits like a bullet. Ethan couldn't move. The words on Ryan's phone blurred in his vision. "I miss you. I hate that we can't talk. Ethan is watching me. I don't know what to do. Just wait. I need time. Last week. Not months ago. Not before therapy. Now." Julia never stopped. Every whispered apology, every tearful "I love you." Every night she climbed into bed beside him like nothing was wrong. It was all a lie. Ryan smirked, watching him unravel. "So," he said, tilting his head, "you gonna go home and pretend everything's fine? Or are you finally gonna do something about it?" Ethan's fists clenched. His entire body shook with rage. "Why the hell are you even telling me this?" he asked, voice low and dangerous. Ryan chuckled. "Because I win either way." Ethan's stomach turned. Ryan took a step closer. "If you stay with her, you're a fool. If you leave, she comes running back to me." Ethan saw red. His hand shot out, gripping Ryan by the collar, shoving him back against the car. The smirk on Ryan's face finally faltered. "You think this is a game?" Ethan growled, his breath hot with fury. "You think you've won?" Ryan grinned, but there was something uneasy in his eyes now. "Touch a nerve, did I?" Ethan's knuckles itched to swing, to wipe that smug look off Ryan's face forever. But he didn't, because Ryan wanted a reaction. And Ethan? Ethan wasn't about to give him one. Instead, he let go. Ryan stumbled back, adjusting his shirt, giving a slow, amused nod. "Smart move," he muttered. "I respect that." Ethan wiped a hand over his face, exhaling sharply. "This is the last time we ever speak," he said, voice dead calm. Ryan shrugged. "That's up to Julia, isn't it?" Ethan turned without another word, heading for his car. Ryan called after him. "You're gonna go home and ask her, aren't you?" he taunted. "You really think she'll tell you the truth?" Ethan didn't stop, didn't acknowledge him, because Ryan was right. Julia would lie. But this time, Ethan would be ready. Day 64, the confrontation Julia never saw coming. Home, 7:15 p.m. Julia sat on the couch, trying to keep her hands from shaking. Ethan had been acting strange for days. Colder, calculating. And now she could feel it. Something was coming. The front door creaked open. Ethan stepped inside. Julia forced a smile. "Hey, you're home late." Ethan set his keys down on the counter. Didn't answer. Didn't look at her. Just walked to the liquor cabinet, pouring himself a drink. Julia's stomach twisted. He knew. She could feel it in her bones. He knew. "Where were you?" she asked, trying to keep her voice light. Ethan took a slow sip of whiskey. Then he finally met her eyes, and what she saw made her breath hitch. Not anger, not heartbreak, something worse. Certainty. "I met with Ryan," Ethan said. Julia's world tilted. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. Ethan set his glass down. "Want to try that again?" he asked coolly. "Or are you gonna lie to me one last time?" Silence. Then, Julia exhaled shakily. "I never stopped talking to him," she whispered. The words hung in the air, cold, heavy. Ethan's entire body locked. He knew the truth, but hearing her admit it, it was a different kind of betrayal. His breath came slow, controlled. "Why?" he asked. Julia's lips parted, but she had no answer. Ethan shook his head. "Was it always a lie?" he asked. "Every apology? Every promise?" "No," Julia said quickly. I was trying, Ethan. I wasn't ready to let go." Ethan laughed. Cold, hollow laugh. "That's funny," he said, "because you didn't seem to have any problem letting go of me." Julia flinched. Ethan stood, gripping the edge of the table so hard his knuckles turned white. "You made me fight for this," he whispered. "You made me fight for you. And the whole time you were still choosing him." Julia's eyes burned. "I wanted to stop," she pleaded. "I was trying to stop. But you didn't." Ethan's voice was dead. "You let me believe we had a chance. You let me break myself trying to fix something you had already thrown away." Julia reached for him. "Ethan, please." He took a step back. And just like that, something between them snapped. Something broke. And they both knew. This was the beginning of the end. Ryan's final play, the wild card no one saw coming. Ryan's apartment, 10:45 p.m. Ryan leaned back against his couch, phone in hand. He had expected anger from Ethan. But what he saw instead, that was something better. Ethan looked done. And if Ethan walked away, Julia would come crawling back. Ryan smirked, tapping his fingers against the armrest. Then his phone rang. His smirk widened when he saw the name. He answered smoothly. "Hey there, Julia." Silence. Then her voice, soft, shaken. "I think he's going to leave me." Ryan's grin grew. And in that moment he knew this wasn't over. Not even close. Day 65, the morning after the end. The house was silent. Not the kind of silence that brings peace. The kind that fills a graveyard. Ethan sat at the kitchen table, staring at his wedding ring. He had twisted it on his finger thousands of times over the years. A habit, a reflex, now felt foreign. Julia stood in the doorway, her face pale, her eyes swollen from a night of crying. But Ethan didn't feel anything anymore. "You're leaving," Julia whispered. Ethan nodded. Julia wiped at her face, stepping forward. "We can fix this," she pleaded. We can go back to therapy. I'll do anything. Ethan let out a slow breath. You don't get it, do you? Julia froze. Ethan finally looked up at her, and the weight of his gaze made her breath hitch. You didn't just cheat, he said, voice eerily calm. You let me believe I had a chance. You let me fight for something that didn't exist anymore. Julia shook her head. That's not true, she said, her voice breaking. I did love you. I do. Ethan's expression didn't change. But you loved him, too. The words hit like a gunshot. Julia flinched, because she knew he wasn't wrong. And that was why she couldn't argue. Ethan stood, sliding off his ring and placing it on the table between them. I deserved better than this, he said quietly. Tears spilled down Julia's face. Ethan, please. He stepped around her, grabbed his bag from the hallway. He didn't turn back, didn't hesitate, because this time, he was done. Ryan's victory, the man who thought he won. Ryan's apartment, 10:30 a.m. Ryan lounged on his couch, sipping a coffee, waiting, because he knew Julia. He knew how this would end. Ethan would leave, and when Julia was alone, she would come back. A knock sounded at the door. Ryan smirked. Right on time. He stood, straightening his shirt, and pulled open the door. Julia, he said smoothly. I was wondering when you'd... Bam. Julia's hand connected with his face so hard his head snapped to the side. Ryan stumbled back, blinking in shock. Julia stood in the doorway, shaking, furious, broken. You ruined my life, she spat. Ryan touched his jaw, his smirk fading. Julia. No, she snapped. You don't get to talk. You don't get to look at me like I'm yours. I was never yours. Ryan's face darkened. You came to me, he said coldly. And I regret it, she shot back. Ryan's jaw clenched. Julia took a deep breath, her shoulders shaking. I lost my husband because of you, she whispered. Because I was stupid. Because I let you pull me into something that was never real. Ryan let out a bitter laugh. You're really gonna blame me? Julia stared at him for a long moment. No, she admitted. I blame myself. Ryan's smirk returned. Then why are you here? Julia exhaled. To tell you that I never want to see you again. Ryan's expression froze. You're lying. She wasn't. Julia turned away. Ryan stepped forward, grabbing her wrist. You don't get to just walk away from me, he hissed. Julia wrenched her arm free. Watch me. And then, she left. For good. 1 year later, a new beginning. Ethan's new apartment. Ethan leaned against the balcony railing, watching the city lights flicker in the distance. It had taken time. Months of therapy, sleepless nights, and painful self-reflection. But finally, he felt free. No more waiting. No more guessing. No more wondering if he was enough. Because he knew now, Julia's choices had never been about him. They were about her. And Ethan? Ethan was done carrying someone else's mistakes. His phone buzzed. A message. Unknown number. Ethan, I hope you're happy. Truly. I'm sorry. Ethan stared at the screen for a long moment. Then, he deleted the message and walked inside, without looking back. The end. Thank you for watching. That's the end of The Silent Wound. A story of betrayal, consequences, and the choice to walk away. Thank you for watching and staying until the end. Your support means everything. Before you go, like the video, it really helps. Subscribe for more powerful stories. Comment your thoughts. What would you have done? Turn on notifications so you never miss a new upload. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.